This video is sponsored by Mel Chemistry, an awesome monthly subscription with fun, educational, and safe experiments for kids and parents to do at home. It comes with everything you need to get started, plus over 90 experiments, over 30 chemistry topics delivered right to your door. Click the link below to get 25% off your first month, and stay tuned for a chance to win a free subscription at the end of the video.
Today, a t-shirt is a staple of a modern wardrobe, being cheap and easy to wear. But its production and the labor behind it is usually pretty unknown, with many questions of ethical labor practices for making them in foreign countries with lax regulations. It's hard to know what exactly goes into making a shirt that can be bought at such a cheap price. So to find out exactly what that would take to do it yourself, I'm gonna make one myself, without attempting to grow all of the cotton fibers for it myself locally, do all of the labor to produce it into a shirt, and since a t-shirt is rarely sold in its raw color, dye and print it myself. How hard could that be? Step 1, growing the cotton. The first challenge I face in growing my t-shirt is that I don't live in an ideal climate for the growing of cotton here in Minnesota, which needs a nice long, warm growing season, most commonly like that in the southern US. So to extend the limited growing season here, so that we were able to start in the dead of winter in February, I enlisted the help of a local hydroponic store, Midwest Supplies. We weren't able to find a ton of information on how best to grow cotton indoors, so I tried a few different methods of growing them. Some in soil, some in a rock wool growing medium. First, I scratched up the outer hull of the cotton seeds to help them sprout faster, and then planted them and left them to grow for a few weeks. Then transferred them to larger pots where they would grow for the next 3 months. Then, when the last frost had finally passed in May, it was time to get them transferred outside into my community garden plot. Alright, I'll load it up with my cotton. I'll take it to the garden. But first, I'll need to clear the field. At this stage, I moved everything over to just soil and kept a few of them inside some large bags so that I could potentially bring them back inside if an early frost came in. A few weeks later, I ran into the next issue, when some heavy spring rainfall flooded the area, threatening to drown my cotton. So took some quick action to move the plants to a less flooded area and built up some of the soil so they'd be drier. While looking pretty rough, they fortunately were able to pull through and keep going. Through the summer, they continued to produce flowers, which then turned into bolls, and then opened up into cotton.
Stubby guy, and he's got a couple bolls growing on him. Some flowers. This guy's pretty small too. This guy actually has a ton of them. It's growing kind of sideways.
Then the frost hit, and the growing season was abruptly over in October. A lot of the bolls hadn't even opened yet, so my yield was a bit lower than what it should have been. The less than ideal climate, transitioning from being indoor to outdoor, and then being nearly drowned, all likely slowed its development. Fortunately, some of the unopened balls did continue to develop, and I was able to come back later and harvest a whole new batch. Step 2, turning the fiber into a t-shirt. Now with a crop of cotton collected, the next step is turning it into a linear thread, turning that thread into a 2D cloth, and turning that 2D cloth into a 3D t-shirt. But for this, I'm going to need some special tools. Because of cotton's short threads, a standard spinning wheel can be difficult to use to spin it. I generally need one that can spin the short fibers a little faster. So I enlisted some help with building a simple electric spinning wheel. This ran into its own issues of scheduling conflicts and miscommunications, but eventually resulted in a completed wheel. First, I spent a good amount of time practicing on spinning wool, which is an easier fiber to spin, just to get the hang of the spinning wheel and to get better at making a consistent thin thread. Then moved on to the cotton, which is a much bigger challenge with its shorter threads. Getting a consistent and strong thread took a very long time to master. And after realizing the huge time investment this was going to take to make all of the thread I needed, I realized I was going to add someone else to help split the labor, so they'd be able to start weaving the fabric as I spin it. Enter Annalise. Initially to offer some advice on constructing a loom myself, but as the project went on, I ended up recruiting her more and more to help me complete this massive project. The challenge with this article of clothing is that we are aiming for a lightweight fabric made with a very thin yarn, all produced with an even consistency and tight enough density that you can print onto it. In a standard t-shirt, this is done by knitting it, which gives the shirt fabric its stretchy characteristic. But to try and achieve a t-shirt quality hand knit would be pretty much impossible and incredibly time consuming, especially for someone like me who's only learned the basics of knitting. This quality of knit fabric was only possible thanks to the invention of the knitting machine in 1589. But building something that complex was out the window. So I set Annalise out with the challenge of producing a basic loom that provided a fabric with a density thick enough to print on. Her initial design ran into some design flaws. So after a struggle of spending a month to just produce a small strip of cloth, she went back to the design board to make some improvements.
So this is the new and improved loom. I've made some alterations to it because with the old loom, this piece of fabric took a month and it's really all around very bad. It's got a very loose weave, a very uneven weave, and then you can also see through it like cheesecloth. It's not very good, and it's definitely not printable. I cut that off and made some alterations to the loom to hopefully make a better quality fabric that we could definitely make a t-shirt out of and definitely print on. One of the first alterations I did was I had Andy 3D print a ratchet and pulse system to function as the brake so that this actually doesn't like move on me when I don't want it to. The next thing that we changed was I had this beater bar ordered, well, the reed that fits in the wooden frame to make it a beater bar, and that packs the weft threads back much more densely and much more evenly so that you're getting a much better looking fabric. I also had these heddles ordered and then built these wooden shaft frames for them. There's about 1,000 heddles on here, 250 per shaft. So that's how many warp threads are through the fabric, is roughly 1,000. And then to lift the heddle shafts, I put in this lever plate frame. This string goes back on either side down and then ties into the heddle shafts. And so when you lower the lever, it raises the heddle shaft to make the shed. So you'd lift every other shaft and that would lift every other thread. And then you drop those and then lift these to lift the other threads. And that's pretty much all the improvements made.
What's her name?
Her name is Florence, because Florence is the machine. I love her dearly. We were able to weave this fabric, which is much nicer and much denser and all around way better, in about a week instead of this, which took a month. So now that we are at what based on my math, should be about 58 inches of fabric, which is enough to make a t-shirt. I'm going to cut the fabric off, snip, snip. I'm very scared. And unroll it, and we'll see what it looks like as one whole piece of fabric. Look at that. Alrighty, so, ta-da! It's really nice, honestly. I'm really excited to see how it prints.
Then Annalise sewed it all together into the full t-shirt. Thanks to Annalise, I now have the completed t-shirt all woven and sewn together now, and it's ready for printing. Step 3, dyeing and printing. There are two main ways to add color to clothing, with a dye or with a pigment. I'm going to be using a combination of the two for my t-shirt and a few different techniques to get the desired final look. But first, let's collect and prep my dyes. While growing the cotton, I also attempted to grow a variety of different plant dyes. Weld, madder, anchusa, greenweed, false indigo, and woad, but unfortunately, all the plants more or less ended up dying during the first growing season. That's the false indigo. I planted it at the beginning of the year and didn't really sprout until like a month ago. So I got a few of them here, but I'm not gonna get any flowers from them. Standing in the rest of my dye garden, which nothing really grew. Everything died. So next, I constructed some hydroponic setups so I could grow them through the winter, including some more tropical plants that I normally wouldn't be able to grow in this climate, like indigo. But again, a lot of these didn't sprout or ended up dying soon after. So overall, that left my available arsenal of dyes pretty limited, but I was able to wind up with 4 dyeing options. First up, I have the turmeric. I previously used this for trying to dye the candy corn orange. First arrived to me back then, it was almost dead, nursed it back to life, and the past couple weeks ago, it just decided to die again. So I think it's finally over now, but be a good excuse to now harvest it and extract a dye, which would be a really nice, strong yellow gold dye. If you ever spilled a food with turmeric in it, you know how well it can stain. Yeah, that's good stuff. Next, I have walnuts I collected several years ago. They were originally intended to use them as a brown dye, but instead I've only so far used them to stain wood. After dehusking them, they're boiled in water, then the solution can be used for staining either wood or cloth a nice dark brown. For a red dye, I've collected the tiny insects called cochineal while I was in Mexico. They live on the leaves of cacti and contain a strong dye called carminic acid. To turn the little bugs into a dye, they just need to be crushed up, boiled, and strained and rinsed. Lastly, while the woad I had tried to grow at home had failed and died, well, in England, I found the plant in bountiful supply and was able to harvest a bunch there. Woad contains the same blue pigment as is found in indigo. To extract it, the leaves are steeped in warm water, then cooled and strained. Add some soda ash and aerate it, and the blue pigment should settle out. For my t-shirt, I'm also going to use a carbon black pigment mixed with the flaxseed oil. Now with some options for adding some color, I just need to apply them. In preparations for my own t-shirt, I previously checked out a local screen printing and design house, Franklin U, to learn how t-shirts today are printed. They also came up with this crazy awesome design that I want to attempt to replicate on my t-shirt. Modern screen printing is pretty difficult to replicate from scratch, but I should be able to do a process that was its predecessor, block printing. But first, I want to use the dyes I collected in a way to add some color to the design. So I'm gonna do a process called resistant dyeing, where you use a wax to kind of cover the areas you don't want dyed, and then you can control and dye just certain regions. So I have the 4 different dyes, and I took the design that Franklin U made for us before and broke it down into different dye regions, which I then cut out of this material here, paint wax over it to cover up what I don't want dyed, then dye each region, hopefully get a variety of different colors and hopefully some interesting patterns. Probably dye the shirt itself overall.
looks like a nice yellow though. I'm gonna prepare the woad for the woad dye bath. To do that, I'm gonna take the soda ash and mix it with about 80 degrees centigrade water. So now that the woad and soda ash solution has sat for about 30 minutes, I'm going to dunk it into the actual dye pot. I'm going to sprinkle sodium diethionate on top to deoxygenate the vat so that there's no oxygen in it and the reaction will take place in the fabric when it gets lifted out. So this is the final result of woad tie-dye. I am pretty proud of this, honestly. It turned blue, and that's all I could ask of it. Overall, I think it's gonna look really good once it's all put together. I think it looks good.
The dye is all taken care of. The next step is a block print. I had Annalise help carve out the linoleum block for the design, while I mixed up a new batch of black oil paint. So got finished with all the dyeing on the t-shirt. Got really decent results. The turmeric and the woad turned out really nice, and the walnut. The cochineal, it's kind of a failure. There's a faint pinkness to it, but mostly it's all washed out. But other than that, it actually worked out pretty good. Pretty cool results. Now I'm gonna do the very last step of the block print, which we have carved out of a linoleum block here. Just gotta press it on there with some black oil paint. Should be done. Project has taken almost 3 years at this point, so I think I'm gonna do a test run first. Make sure I don't mess it up right now at the very end.
Alright, I say she's as good as she's gonna get. Like, and drop it. Tie sticks. Alrighty. Definitely some stoner kid in the 80s would love this shirt. Very grunge, that's what it is, it's grunge.
It's a print.
Lightning bolt looks good.
Yeah, it's got hints of color.
Yeah. Your shorts are brown.
Yeah. Most of Dobby's brown.
But she's a tortoiseshell, so that works.
Yeah.
Annalise went through and touched up both the ink and some of the dyed spots that had washed out through all the different rinsings. All right, so here is the completed printed t-shirt, all assembled and on me. And just took about almost 3 years, which makes us the longest running project I've ever done for the series. And it's been a huge pain to actually get this done. I ended up having to add on Annalise to help me do this. This project was a huge pain. I think every step along the way I found things were a lot more complicated than they normally would be to make a t-shirt. Just starting with the cotton itself, having to grow it this far north had its own challenges, barely got enough cotton. Then after that I had to spin it, having to learn the skill of spinning, weaving it, and then we were able to get a decent printable fabric. It was a pretty nice image, but because it's woven, it lacks some characteristics of knit fabric, and that it's not very stretchy, which makes it a pain to put on. And then to print it was its own challenge of collecting all these different colors. Didn't necessarily work the best, but made a workable solution and print it by hand. I think this really illustrates how much the t-shirt is a product of the Industrial Revolution. And trying to create one without that just makes it a ton of work. That's why in the end, when I total up the total cost, assuming I pay myself minimum wage, which is about $8 right now, all of my time and Annalise's time, this ended up costing almost $5,000. That's really the difference the Industrial Revolution makes, that a t-shirt you can get maybe as cheap as $5 versus $5,000. This is the product of a very inefficient production that costs $5,000. A little bit cheaper. Guys at Franklin U put together this t-shirt with the original print, a little bit more affordable if you want to get it, a little bit higher quality. And then we're also going to sell some of our own prints using this block print. I'm going to give some of these to our patrons. You guys can look forward to that. This is our last video before we start making a slight change of direction in our series in a small, significant matter, making everything, including my tools, from scratch, which will result with me resetting back to the Stone Age and working my way up. Stay tuned for an announcement explaining this more later this week. And a big thank you to our patrons. We couldn't do this without your support. And even then, we struggled to make videos like these, considering the huge amount of manual labor they require. If you're not a patron, we deeply appreciate it if you became one. I share weekly behind the scenes looks, clips before they're released, and monthly live streams where you get to voice where the channel's direction goes. Thanks for considering, and thanks for watching. Thanks again to Milk Chemistry for sponsoring this video. Here were the winners for our last drawing we did. Send us your email and we'll hook you up with your free 6-month subscription. Now here's your next chance to win your own free 6-month subscription to Milk Chemistry. Just answer this question in the comments. What Disney character was popularly featured on t-shirts in the 1960s? In a couple weeks, we'll do a random drawing to select 3 lucky winners. If you are too eager to wait to see if you won, click the link below to get 25% off your first subscription to Milk Chemistry. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and check out other content we have covering a wide variety of topics. Also, if you've enjoyed these series, consider supporting us on Patreon. We are largely a fan-funded channel and depend on the support of our viewers in order to keep our series going. Thanks for watching.